The most dangerous person in any room is not the loudest, not the most aggressive, and not the most obviously powerful. It is the one who observes everything, reveals nothing, and has already considered every possible outcome before the conversation began. Most people believe that presence in any environment is demonstrated through speech, through the confident articulation of positions, the visible demonstration of knowledge, the active participation in conversations that allows others to calibrate how much weight to assign to what this person says. Those who understand human nature know that this belief, however natural it feels, consistently surrenders the most significant strategic advantage that any social or professional environment makes available: the informational advantage of an unread interior. Strategic silence is not the absence of contribution. It is the deliberate withholding of the one resource that every other party in any interaction is continuously attempting to extract: an accurate map of what you think, what you know, what you want, and what you are planning. Every statement made contributes to that map. Every disclosed position confirms or extends it. Every emotional response to what others say reveals the specific coordinates of the interior landscape that strategic opponents will use to locate pressure points, calibrate approaches, and position their own moves relative to yours. The person who speaks least builds the least complete map for everyone else to navigate by, and navigating an uncharted territory, trying to predict, influence, or outmaneuver someone whose interior remains genuinely unknown, is among the most cognitively and strategically exhausting positions any opponent can be placed in. Few people understand that strategic silence also forces a dynamic that benefits its practitioner independent of any specific information advantage. Silence creates discomfort, and discomfort in social environments where most people have a powerful compulsion to eliminate it through speech reliably produces disclosure. The person who remains genuinely comfortable in silence, while others are not, will consistently find that others fill the silence with information, with positions, with concerns, with the specific content of their current thinking that they would never have offered in response to direct questioning. Pay attention to what this produces across the full span of any relationship or organizational environment, because the cumulative informational advantage of strategic silence, compounded across months and years of consistent practice, is the specific kind of advantage that most people never identify as the source of what appears to be exceptional strategic judgment. It is not exceptional judgment. It is exceptional information. The two are easily confused because the outcomes they produce look identical from the outside. This is where the habit of long-term positioning reveals its connection to everything strategic silence accumulates. Because information gathered through silence is only strategically valuable if the person gathering it has a sufficiently long temporal horizon to understand what it means for positions that will only become relevant months or years from now. Most people evaluate decisions against the immediate environment, against what this choice produces today, in this conversation, in this interaction, given what is currently visible and currently at stake. Those who understand human nature know that this short-term evaluation consistently creates long-term liabilities, because every position taken today creates constraints tomorrow, and every alliance formed today creates obligations that shape the options available in futures that the short-term decision maker never considered. The person impossible to outsmart positions themselves not for the present interaction, but for the environment they anticipate will exist when the consequences of today's choices have fully developed. They make moves that appear unnecessary in the current context and indispensable in the future one. They build relationships that seem low value in the present and become high value when circumstances shift in the directions they had already considered. The greatest mistake is to optimize for the visible present while neglecting the invisible future that today's decisions are continuously constructing. This connects directly to the habit of controlled information release, which may be the most immediately applicable of all the principles in any competitive environment. Information is not neutral. Every piece of information released changes the landscape by giving others the capacity to respond to what they now know, to position against what they have now understood, and to exploit what they have now identified as a vulnerability or an opportunity. The person who controls what they release, when they release it, and to whom maintains a permanent gap between what others know about them and what they know about others. And in any environment where strategic positioning is occurring, consciously or not, this asymmetry is one of the most consequential advantages available. Most people release information reflexively, in response to conversational pressure, social expectation, the natural reciprocity of disclosure that most human interaction depends on. Those who understand human nature know that this reflexive disclosure can be observed, interrupted, and redirected without most people ever recognizing that a choice was made. The question to ask before any disclosure, in any conversation, in any environment, with any person, is not whether the information is secret. It is what the landscape looks like for the person receiving it once they have it, that it didn't look like before. If the answer changes the landscape in ways that don't serve your long-term position, the information belongs in the unread interior. This is where the habit of alliance intelligence completes the informational advantage that silence and controlled disclosure begin building. Because information about the external environment, about who is genuinely aligned with whom, about what interests are actually being served, by what apparent loyalties, about where the real lines of influence and obligation run beneath the social surface, is the map without which all other strategic capabilities are operating in partial blindness. Most people navigate their social and professional environments through the surface presentation of relationships, through what people say their loyalties are, through the visible affiliations that public behavior communicates, through the apparent warmth of interactions that may or may not reflect any genuine underlying alignment. The wisest leaders recognize that the surface map and the actual map diverge in almost every complex social environment, and that the specific nature of their divergence is among the most strategically valuable information available to anyone positioned to read it accurately. Alliance intelligence is developed not through direct inquiry, which produces managed answers, but through the patient observation of where people's choices consistently align, when alignment costs them something, where they position themselves, when a real conflict emerges between competing interests, what they protect, when protection requires revealing what they value and what they sacrifice, without apparent difficulty, when sacrifice would most efficiently serve the interest they were always most genuinely prioritizing. There is a quality that the most strategically formidable people in any environment share that is almost never consciously identified as the source of their advantage, because it produces no visible behavior, makes no observable claim, and announces itself through nothing except the specific difficulty that others experience when they attempt to read, predict, or position against someone who possesses it. Emotional unreadability. Most people believe that emotional transparency is a virtue, that the willingness to allow one's internal states to be visible communicates authenticity, trustworthiness, and the kind of genuine presence that builds meaningful relationships. Those who understand human nature know that this belief, however genuinely it is held, transfers control of the most strategically significant dimension of any interaction to whoever is paying close enough attention to read what is being displayed. Every visible emotional response is a data point. Every flash of satisfaction communicates that something the other person did produce the desired effect, which tells them to continue. Every visible discomfort communicates that a specific approach is reaching its intended target, which tells them to press further. Every emotional reaction that arrives faster than social management can contain it, maps a piece of the interior landscape that strategic opponents will return to whenever they need leverage. The person whose emotional states remain genuinely unreadable, not through performed indifference, not through the visible suppression that reveals its own information about what is being suppressed, but through a genuine internal composure that produces no surface signal available for extraction, maintains a permanent tactical advantage in every interaction where they deploy it. Pay attention to what emotional unreadability does to the strategic positioning of anyone attempting to navigate a relationship or an environment with someone who possesses it. They cannot calibrate their approach because they receive no feedback, confirming whether the approach is working. They cannot locate pressure points because no response confirms their existence. They cannot predict reactions because the reactions are not being externalized in the form that prediction depends on. Most people miss this principle because they confuse emotional unreadability with emotional absence, with coldness, distance, or the specific kind of disconnection that produces its own strategic problems in environments where trust and genuine relationship are required for effective long-term operation. The hidden reason emotional unreadability is compatible with genuine warmth and genuine relationship is structural. What is being managed is not the emotional experience itself. It is the external signal that the emotional experience produces. The warmth can be genuine, the connection can be real. What is withheld is only the specific behavioral evidence that would allow the warmth and the connection to be strategically exploited by those who would use them as entry points. This is where the habit of deliberate unpredictability extends what emotional unreadability begins, because unreadability removes the emotional signal that calibration requires, while deliberate unpredictability removes the behavioral pattern that prediction requires. Most people operate from consistent behavioral patterns, not through any conscious choice, but because consistency is the natural output of consistent character, consistent values, and consistent ways of processing the world. And this natural consistency, however it reflects genuine integrity, provides those observing it with a reliable model for anticipating what this person will do under any given set of circumstances. The person who cannot be outsmarted understands that this predictability, however natural its source, is a strategic liability, because it allows opponents to position themselves before the move is made, to prepare for the response before the action that will require it, and to structure their own behavior with the specific confidence that comes from knowing how the other party will respond. Deliberate unpredictability does not require erratic behavior. It does not require the abandonment of genuine values or the performance of inconsistency for its own sake. It requires the specific habit of occasionally varying the response in ways that prevent the pattern from becoming sufficiently consistent to generate reliable prediction, introducing enough variation that the behavioral model anyone is building of you remains permanently incomplete. Few people understand that this variation is most effective when it involves the specific behaviors that others have identified as most predictable, because those are the behaviors that current models are most confidently built around, and a variation from predicted behavior in exactly the area where prediction was most confident produces the maximum disruption to the model's overall reliability. Pay attention to what this produces over time in any environment where strategic positioning is occurring, because the cumulative effect of consistent emotional unreadability combined with deliberate behavioral unpredictability is a relational and strategic position that is extraordinarily difficult to navigate against, not through any active aggression or defensive posturing, but through the simple impossibility of building an accurate model of how this person operates. You cannot outmaneuver someone whose next move you cannot anticipate, and you cannot anticipate someone whose emotional signals provide no navigational data and whose behavioral patterns refuse to consolidate into the consistent model that prediction requires. This is where the habit of patient observation before action reveals the strategic discipline that makes all the other habits possible. Because emotional unreadability and deliberate unpredictability are only strategically valuable to a person who has gathered sufficient information about the environment and its participants to know which specific variations will be most disruptive, which emotional signals are most closely monitored, and what the current models others are operating from actually predict. The most consequential strategic errors in any environment are made under time pressure, when the urgency of a situation compresses the observation window that accurate assessment requires and forces a commitment before the available evidence is sufficient to warrant it. Most people believe that the ability to act decisively under pressure is a mark of strategic competence. Those who understand human nature know that the ability to resist the pressure to act before sufficient observation has been completed, to tolerate the discomfort of an unresolved situation rather than resolve it prematurely through action that the available evidence doesn't support, is consistently the rarer and more valuable capability. History has shown that the most consequential strategic errors were almost always made by people who acted when the situation seemed to demand action. But the information available was insufficient to determine what action was appropriate. And the most consequential strategic successes were almost always achieved by people who waited, who extended the observation window beyond the point where action felt urgent, who gathered the additional information that patients made accessible, and who acted from a position of genuine clarity rather than the managed uncertainty that premature action consistently produces. This is where the habit of letting others underestimate completes the observational advantage that patience enables, because the person who allows others to underestimate them receives something that no amount of active intelligence gathering can replicate as efficiently: an accurate view of how others actually think, actually position, and actually behave when they believe the quality of attention they are receiving does not warrant managed presentation. The underestimated person is shown the unmanaged version of everyone around them, the concerns they didn't know to conceal, the plans they didn't know to disguise, the alliances they didn't think needed to be hidden, the assessment of the environment that they held before knowing that the person they were sharing it with was capable of understanding its implications. Most people miss this principle because it requires something that the natural human desire for recognition makes genuinely difficult: the willingness to allow an inaccurate assessment of your capabilities to stand uncorrected for the specific duration required to extract the maximum informational value from the inaccuracy. The greatest mistake is to correct every underestimation as soon as it surfaces. The strongest position is often to observe, in patient silence, everything that the underestimation reveals. There is a force that operates in every social and professional environment that most people engage with only accidentally, building it when their behavior happens to produce it, and losing it when their behavior happens to undermine it, without ever consciously understanding what creates it, what destroys it, or how completely it determines the baseline from which every interaction in their life begins: reputation. Most people believe that reputation is the natural result of their actions, that it accumulates organically through the visible quality of what they do, and requires no deliberate management beyond simply behaving well. Those who understand human nature know that reputation is not simply what you do, it is what others believe you will do, and that belief is shaped not only by direct observation, but by narrative, by social transmission, by the specific stories that circulate about a person through environments they may never directly inhabit. The person who understands this engineers their reputation deliberately, not through deception, but through the conscious management of which behaviors are made visible, which stories are allowed to circulate, and which impressions are permitted to consolidate into the durable beliefs that constitute a reputation's actual content. Power rarely announces itself, and neither does the most effective form of reputation engineering. It operates through the consistent, patient alignment of visible behavior with the specific qualities that the desired reputation requires, building across time through accumulated evidence rather than declared claim, a set of expectations in the minds of everyone in the relevant environment that shapes their behavior toward you before any specific interaction has occurred. Few people understand that reputation's most significant strategic value is not what it produces in positive interactions, the trust it generates, the authority it confers, the influence it enables. It is what it produces in adversarial ones. A well-constructed reputation makes certain forms of opposition too costly to attempt, certain attacks too implausible to land, and certain underestimations too risky to maintain. This is where the habit of knowing when not to win reveals the most counterintuitive principle in the entire strategic framework, because it operates against the most powerful and most consistently destructive impulse in any competitive environment: the compulsion to demonstrate superiority in every available situation. Most people believe that winning consistently is the natural expression of strategic competence, that the person who is most capable should be most visibly dominant in the environments they inhabit, and that any restraint in the deployment of capability represents an unnecessary sacrifice of advantage. Those who understand human nature know that this belief is the source of more strategic self-destruction than almost any other single error, because consistent visible dominance produces something in the social environment that eventually undermines every advantage that dominance was supposed to secure. Resentment, coalition, the specific political formation of those who have been consistently outcompeted and who share the common interest of preventing future outcompetition by the same party. The wisest leaders recognize that selective restraint, the deliberate choice not to deploy every available advantage in every available situation, to allow others occasional victories that cost little but build the relational capital that sustained influence requires, produces a long-term political and relational position that the compulsive demonstrator of superiority can never achieve. Because the person who allows others to win when winning costs them little has built something that no amount of demonstrated competence can construct. Allies who believe they have something to gain from their continued association, and allies in any environment where power is distributed across multiple parties rather than concentrated in a single one, are worth more than victories. There is a thread that runs through every habit examined in this video, through strategic silence, long-term positioning, controlled information release, alliance intelligence, emotional unreadability, deliberate unpredictability, patient observation, the allowance of underestimation, reputation engineering, and the discipline of knowing when not to win. And it is not a thread about tactics. It is a thread about a fundamentally different relationship with time, information, and the nature of power itself. Most people operate in the immediate environment, responding to what is visible, reacting to what is present, optimizing for the outcome that the current moment makes available. The person who cannot be outsmarted operates from a different temporal position entirely, one in which the current moment is always understood as one point in a longer sequence, where the most important outcomes are not those that will become visible today, but those that will become irreversible tomorrow. This difference in temporal positioning explains why the habits examined here appear, from the outside, almost counterintuitive. Strategic silence looks like passivity when it is actually intelligence gathering. Long-term positioning looks like inaction when it is actually superior sequencing. Allowing underestimation looks like weakness when it is actually the most efficient available method of extracting accurate information from an environment that manages its disclosures whenever it believes accurate assessment is occurring. Few people understand that the most formidable strategic positions are almost never the ones that look formidable in real time. They are the ones that become recognizably formidable in retrospect, when the full sequence of decisions, each of which seemed unremarkable or even disadvantageous in isolation, reveals itself as a coherent strategic architecture that was always moving toward an outcome that only the person who built it could see from the beginning. The wisest leaders recognize that this kind of strategic architecture is not built through superior intelligence. It is built through superior discipline, the specific discipline of emotional restraint that prevents premature revelation, of observational patience that prevents premature commitment, of reputational consistency that prevents the accumulated credibility from being spent in moments of impulsive demonstration, and of relational intelligence that maintains the alliances that sustained influence requires. True influence begins not with the deployment of capability, but with the development of the specific internal qualities that make that deployment consistently strategic rather than consistently reactive, patience over urgency, observation over assertion, position over performance. The long game over the immediate victory. Power rarely announces itself, and the person who has genuinely internalized these habits rarely needs to announce themselves either. Their position speaks with a quiet authority that active demonstration can never replicate. Their decisions carry a weight that comes not from force, but from the accumulated evidence of consistent strategic intelligence, applied across sufficient time to produce outcomes that retrospect makes appear inevitable. The greatest mistake is to spend a life demonstrating capability to people who would respect it more if it were shown less. The strongest position is always the one built so patiently, so quietly, and so completely that by the time anyone else understands what was constructed, it is already impossible to dismantle.